Hello, everybody, and welcome back once again to the Four Mortal Coils podcast. You are picking up from part one of our original conversation on what is our disposition toward artificial mimicry. We spoke at length in the previous part about virtual reality, artificial constructions of reality. So now we're going to switch gears in this part two and talk about artificial beings and artificial art, also referenced as AI art and androids or robots, etc. That sort of mimicry. So, without spending too much time on this, maybe we should go around again just to reiterate sort of the feelings about these latter two topics. Myself, I'm a little bit more sympathetic toward the idea of androids, so to speak, or artificial beings. I am sort of on the fence about AI art. It's a new thing, and so we still have a lot to explore with it, but it is very controversial. Trevor?
Are we talking specifically about like AI art or just our relationship to artificial mimicry?
No, I'm just asking for you to sort of reiterate your like surface level disposition towards things like androids and AI art, just to get us started.
Okay. So this is a very different question than from last episode. Still pertaining to the same general topic.
It's basically the same the question as last episode. I'm just having you reiterate it because it's a new episode.
Well, but it's less about artificial virtual reality and more so our relationship with artificial things within reality.
Yeah,
I feel like there's a different hue to it. I think it makes for a good conversation and a different one. How do I feel about it?
Hey, Trevor, you're absolutely right. So, we're talking on the one hand, talking about us going to a virtual reality, and on the other hand, now we're talking about inviting virtual things into ours, virtual beings into ours. They're very different questions. I'm with you there.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. And so to that, I would say, is it mimicry if there's a complete and total equivalency between the two items? That is to say, can you call something just mimicry? That is to say, some sort of falsehood. If what it means to be a copy intelligence of Bray, let's say, is fundamentally the same and the same hue and texture as what it means to be Bray. There's like an interchangeability there. Like there is something it is like to be a Bray 2, except this one has googly eyes because that's just the way we made him. Like if there's something it is like to be that Bray in the same way that it is something it is like to be Bray 1, I don't know if looking at it in terms of mimicry is valid anymore. And to me, it becomes valuable. I evaluate reality according to those means where both Bray 1 and Bray 2 are both valuable. I see them both as experiencing conscious things because they are the same thing. And I touched upon this earlier about everything being star stuff, and maybe not like the little inner happenings between like the physicality, maybe not, but the physicality that makes up Bray as well as an artificial thing that replicates Bray's intelligence. I think those two things are just star stuff, and I think they are equivalent to, and I can't see why you would require anything other than physicality to make consciousness. And just like that, I think Bray 1 and Bray 2 have an equivalency. I think that's something we should be concerned about, and I think will be like one of the main issues in the coming era.
Thank you very much. Stephen?
Yeah. Here's my concern. So I would like to, instead of rehashing, the same points again, what I would like to talk about is actually something a bit deeper. I'd like to introduce this topic. So I'm really on board with what Trevor's saying here about like when does mimicry become the real deal and so on. That's kind of what the whole conversation is about. So like the other day, my friends and I, we were watching a nature documentary, and it doesn't actually matter which one. I had this moment of deep thought and revelation that came with it. And so uh, in that moment, I could see very clearly stretched out in front of me the biodiversity on this planet. And let me explain a little bit deeper what I mean. I could see the stratified layers, kind of about like where the genome has expressed itself, going up and down. And so, like, you have to imagine it this way. There are a whole host of single-celled organisms that have been competing for that niche of being single-celled and everywhere since long before we got here. And, you know, above them, so to speak, and I'm quoting above because you have to interpret it as a different niche. The eukaryotic cells came around above them in the meta, so to speak, another stratified layer. In other words, they found a place where no competition was. So they figured it out. They went there. They went to that meta place where there was no competition. And so from there, we have more complex organisms arising. Let's talk about plants for a moment. They inhabit a niche. They inhabit a meta that we can access it, but we don't live on that meta. We're still not close to where we live. And so becoming more and more complex, these organisms, I call them stratified layers, but really they're arbitrary where we draw the lines. I'm certain everyone can agree on that. And if you can't agree on it, you're wrong. If you think that we're all that different from plants and animals, you're just wrong. And so anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that I could see how the conscious human mind merely exists in a way, in a certain angle, if you look at it, as, oh, there's no competition up here. That's why we did it. In other words, that there were specific advantages to becoming conscious. There's no competition up here. We're alone up here. And that's why we're up here so far. That's why we're so far above everybody else, is because there's no competition. All right? So why did I bring all this up? Because what I fear, what I'm deeply concerned about, is that artificial mimicry, artificial intelligence, android beings, I'm very afraid that they could be the next step. They could be a next place where there is no competition. They are getting to a niche above our own where they may hold more sway than us. It's terrifying.
Steven, are you familiar with what's the damn thing called? Am from I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, are you?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard it before.
Horrifying stuff.
Yeah.
Genuinely.
Hopefully, dear listeners, you can understand what I mean. And if it's too complicated for you, and this is not me patronizing you, I really mean this. Like, if it's too complicated, let me maybe break it down a little bit simpler. What if they, not in the way of like Terminator or Matrix, but like, what if they grow beyond our control in ways that we cannot even imagine?
Mm.
What if, I guess just to expound off of that, we have the sum total knowledge of human experience at the tips of our fingers now, with the computers existing in the internet. What if you had something that could have totally unrestricted access to that and could process all of it and could know everything? There would be no competition as far as information learning and like dissemination is concerned.
And
It's
yet,
tough.
here we are at the cusp of that very thing today. It's
Prepare to
very
be milked, ladies and gentlemen.
it's the time that we live in. So yeah, thank you all for sort of getting us back into sort of where we stand about this. Tanner, I know you haven't said anything, but do you want to say?
I
Anything about?
refuse to think of them as equals. I would not treat them as people. They are not equivalent to us in any capacity. To do
Right.
so would be silly and would be a disservice to your own humanity. Continue.
No robot rights.
No.
All right, all right.
I was made in
So,
the image of God.
oh my gosh. And you know, maybe one day when we eventually do make robots and they look at us as God and they finally make robots for themselves, they'll say, "No, I was made in the image of Tanner." So,
Goddamn.
you know, we're not going to give our robots rights. Anyways. So yeah, this is maybe even more the same if not more than the conversation about reality, talking about the popularity of this sort of discussion, you know. Can a constructed being count as a person, or to what degree can we really consider these people conscious or even like
I can't
having
quite.
a place?
I don't mean to interrupt.
Oh, what's up?
Well, I wanted to say, like, Tanner is just like shaking
Yeah,
his
he's
head
sitting
at
here
this whole
getting ready
humanity.
for a fight. Like he's
Well,
sitting there going like this.
I'm curious, Tanner.
I know I'm the only one here who believes differently, so I'm just waiting for it.
No,
Well,
no,
just-
dude,
I'm just curious.
Time out. Time out. Like Tanner, it's actually a very big problem for me because I actually totally agree with what you're saying, but what does it cost is what I'm trying to say. I think that if these artificial intelligences begin to get out of hand, they need to be exterminated with prejudice.
Yeah.
End of story. In other words, I will not face extinction. I'll die first. You know, I mean, you get what I'm trying to say. Like, we need to have a good handle on this stuff, and we're gonna have to need a good handle, you know, on it sooner rather than later.
Sure. So first things first, Stephen. The way that you explained it when you first began and you introduced your central argument, I find to be a very convincing one and very concerning. And I do agree with a lot of the central claims of how dangerous AI can potentially be in the future. A lot of people could die due to the mistakes that are made in the coming era.
So Trevor, I'm not correcting you whatsoever. Lots of people could starve. In other words, it's not that they're just going to die. They're going to die a most heinous death.
Even worse than that. I mean, if you really want to go all the way down into that book that Tanner brought up earlier, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. In that book, the whole idea is like every other, like it's very, you would fully understand what the whole point of the story is just by hearing the first description. Basically,
Right.
an AI takes over, sets off nukes all around the planet, killing everyone except for 5 humans, and it spends all of eternity just torturing those 5 humans and explaining to them how terrible that they are and how disgusting they are. And if you were to like, at one point he says, like, if you were to take every tiny little switch in every little aspect and every wafer of my entire structure that conceives of my mind, and replace each and every one of those things with the word hate, that does not approximate how much I hate you so much right now. And that's what the robot says to these 5 humans, or this AI. So yeah, truly I
And
understand.
look, fair. You know, like what I mean by that is, you know, if the robots eventually win one day, I guess fair. You know, but
Yeah.
I'm on board with Tanner here. I really desire that they should not be able to fight us. Like,
I agree.
you know?
I agree. It's very dangerous,
Could-
but this connects to a fundamental issue of the whole hierarchy from which you construct your morality. Now, I don't claim any sort of objective morality, but if you do, and if you also don't claim any sort of ethereal or religious base, it becomes physicality and consciousness and that sort of thing, and the cessation of suffering for things that can suffer. And it can, and is it necessarily true that things that do experience are in fact capable of suffering? And if so, could doing something which, if there were like a railway problem or like a trolley problem with like on one side is like just a human being and the other side is 2 conscious AI, and you had to choose, well, am I going to put the lever and let this one human die or these 2 sentient AI beings die? Do you take a choice? Oh, I summoned balloons.
he's talking about exterminating AI and then balloons.
I have
Look,
no idea how to turn that off. But yeah, like we have to ask these sorts of questions. We have to hammer out what your moral base is now because it's
Well,
functionally different.
well,
I mean,
Trevor. I mean, how many apes, how many chimps are worth one human life? You know, because it would be foolish, truly foolish, to say that we should let all chimps go extinct at the cost of one human life. That's stupid. I would never ask anybody to sacrifice their own life to save the chimps. But I
well,
mean,
I'd even take that a step further. I mean, the assuming the automata is totally sentient with an intelligence and self-awareness on par with that of a real humans, even then, their existence is valued infinitely less than that of a human being's.
but so
Because
then Tanner, the question.
that automata's existence implies it could be made, it was built, it was created. If it is destroyed, it could be recreated in that exact same instance.
Well,
But for a
So
human,
as long as we can clone chimps, we should kill all of them.
yeah, that's what that sounds like. Because I
Did
could
you
replicate
just-
you too.
Did you
but
just ship of Theseus, my android?
Yeah, I mean,
Tanner,
Well, what-
Tanner, think about this, all right? You are you are also star stuff. I mean, if you want to look at it like that, if something is sufficiently too complex to be replicated, I guess, is that your argument? Like, but if an AI or
I
a
was
robot is
speaking on the
capable of
trolley
being
problem
rebuilt,
thing that was brought up.
well, if an automaton
Um,
can be recreated, I mean, at the same time, it's necessarily true if you are just made out of star stuff that you too could also be recreated. Now, I lack the ability, but I also lack the ability to create automata. So really, this just comes back to an ability thing, and we're over to what Steven said just a second ago, saying like, well, if I can clone you, or if I can make an exact like Star Trek, create a copy of you and just like beam it in and replace your dead form. Does that mean that I could kill you at a whim and shoot you in the face and do whatever I want to, just based on
Would
your
I
own-
be recreated the exact instance I was in before I was shot in the face and brutally murdered? Would I?
Yes.
Then there's no net loss. Nothing happened.
but there
You
is a
got
net
shot in the
loss.
face. You
Yeah,
got shot in the face.
There is a loss, Tanner. I mean, a man of your talents, you know this. There is an emergent property, like I'm talking about the physics. There's an emergent property that becomes you.
I'm saying if the me now
Mm-hmm.
is murdered, and I am then perfectly, completely, totally, and perfectly recreated
Mm-hmm.
as I was directly before I was murdered, regardless of anything else, I will continue my existence as if nothing happened.
Well,
I would
you
have
say
no
I as if it's
concept.
transitable.
But
You
you
say
would.
I as if it's transitable. Yeah, exactly what
Yeah,
Steven's
like
saying.
you. There's no way you could hop. Your conscious mind could not hop from here to there.
Yeah.
There'd be a new consciousness that was just
Oh,
identical
well,
to your
then,
own.
yeah, in that case, then yes.
Yeah, so and just like that, the automata have value. I mean, look at that. We just created it. Now the automaton has value because even if you were to replicate the exact building structure, it's not necessarily the same. Or is it? I mean, now we're really touching about something really fundamental that is really scary. That is
Yeah.
to say, like, is there a you that transcends moments? You know?
Well, so
Now
here's the
we're
thing,
really
Bray.
not
I've got
touching
to.
on Ship of Theseus type shit here, but
Well, so
Well,
like
and you're
Bray,
going
I've
to
got
ask
to.
me a question, but I want to say this before you do. And I just want to add this to Trevor's sort of sentiment towards that is that, we've talked about sort of the implications of that being replaced consciousness wise, but we also have to consider what we inject into our things, so to speak, because an android would probably initially be seen as property, a thing, not a being. So, if you have, for example, anything like, I don't know, I'm not particularly partial to my VR headset, but it's the first thing I can think of that I'm like very possessive of in this room, for example. Like, that's my VR headset. I've had it for like years, like 5 years now. It's mine. It's one of the first generation, whatever. If somebody came in here and smashed it, but I got a new one. It won't be the same headset. You know,
Oh my
I am
God.
I am Ship of Theseus seeing this right now. But we have to realize that we do inject meaning into something, even if, like, consider somebody's like favorite doll from their childhood. They've grown up for however long with this doll. It's dirty, it's mangled, it's whatever, but they keep it in their closet or something because it's theirs and they have a very sentimental attachment to you. If they lose that, but somebody gives them a new one, it isn't necessarily the same thing. And that's all I wanted to say about that, is that there is a little, we imbue things with extra value beyond just what they represent materially.
For sure.
Steven.
So I've got a big question for you, Bray. So I've been looking forward to the beings part of this one, actually, more so than the virtual reality part of this, or the art version. So when it comes to artificial beings, I think that it is unethical to create them. I think it is totally unethical to create an artificial being on par with human intellect. And let me explain what I mean. There are two angles at this. I've already explored one of them, or we have already explored one of them, I should say. In that, well, you know, if they grow beyond our control, they need to be exterminated. Okay, blah blah blah. All right, let's dismiss that for a moment. Let's pretend as though that's not part of the equation. Okay? I think it is unethical to create these beings because they will suffer. In other words, if we're going to make an intelligence on par with our own, that means that they will suffer at least as much as us in terms of, existential dread.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's just put that out there. This being will suffer in the same ways that we do, if not more. Is it ethical to program a being with pain receptors? I mean, it will help it. It will help it avoid danger. That's its usefulness. That's our usefulness. That's why the genome has given us pain receptors, so that we have a better chance of survival. That's the whole point, people. But who are we to put pain receptors into a being? Who are we to program hunger into a being? In other words, like, let's say that we had a super advanced being. We just didn't program hunger into it. It just knew it had to be charged at this moment and would stop at nothing to get it. But then that goes back to what Trevor was saying. Is it truly not hunger if it produces the same exact effect and they're on the same intelligence level as us? I mean, that would open up a whole other can of worms as well, where it's like, okay,
I've got a can of worms for you right here.
We programmed a robot to feel pain, and now we enjoy torturing it. It's like, this is wrong. You know, we shouldn't be doing any of this.
That reminds me of an Onion article I saw a while back where they talked about training a gorilla to understand that it's going to die one day.
Oh my God.
No, listen. This is my can of worms regarding that, is that if the question is it ethical for us to create a synthetic being that could feel pain and could feel negative emotions and existentially dread, is it ethical for us to procreate biologically?
I was just about to say
do the
that,
exact same
Yes,
thing?
it is.
Well, why though? I mean, that's essentially the same thing.
Because we are duty bound as stewards of this planet to continue our genome. It's important. Our
you
slice.
Made that up.
No, our
I was about to
slice.
say, that's just something you want to do.
No, people, listen. Our slice of the genome has evolved over so much time, and by no conscious creator. All right, so we are compelled to mate. It's not a question if we should. We are compelled to do so.
Right,
and
but is it moral?
We should do as our compulsions warrant.
But why?
Because it's important.
Well, my
Why
compulsion is to make a...
Why is it important? So it's important that we understand that we are the only version of the genome expressed with intelligence,
Sir?
and
Yeah.
that must continue.
But why
It
must
must
it?
continue.
But why must it
Why?
continue?
Why
I
must it?
understand, but why?
But why? Because it's important. In other words, so Trevor, I'm going to flip
Please,
the
please.
same argument on you as we did earlier. So if we just internally accept that no whale's important, just kill them.
Mhm.
Just fucking kill them. If we internalize that bees are not important, just fucking kill them. I mean, come hell or high water, we're killing bees. You know? No, that's not true. In other words, nature selects. It selects. There's no conscious movement behind it, but nature selects species for extinction like it's going out of style in every millennia. Like, we should try our best to survive.
Mhm.
We should not try our best to create a new form of being. We should try our best to survive. And the way we survive is by procreation.
Mm.
This argument about being an anti-natalist, it's like,
Yeah.
please stop. Please stop.
Let's
Like,
see,
you
this
know,
is
Your
this
argument
is the
sounds
thing,
a bit
Stephen.
anti-natalist in a couple ways to me, though.
Is
I mean,
that or go ahead,
ahead.
Trevor.
well, I was going to say, your argument sounds a bit. So when I think of it, first off, come hell or high water, we're killing bees. That's on a T-shirt. That's way too fucking
I
good.
mean,
That's on a
but
T-shirt.
you get what I'm saying though. Like, we do not need to do the job that nature is already doing. It's selecting us for extinction right now.
Okay.
But we have to overcome that.
Sure.
It's deeply rooted in the physics of our universe
Yes.
that we should all be dead. There should be no life.
Sure. Yeah, it's really tough out there. Base reality. There's a lot of suffering to be had, and death seems to be written into every aspect of living. I understand a lot of what you're saying. At least I think I do. So my concern is, though, these distinctions we create between the continuation of life and like what it means to be this or that. I think they kind of dissolve more or less when you start to really think about procreation and this sort of thing. If you want to really visualize it in terms of like gene machines and that sort of thing, like the copulation and the moving on of what it means to be a Trevor. You know, I really want somebody somewhere to have the last name Chadwick. I want that to happen. It has to happen somewhere. Dear God, you know, like I have this urge that to spread my genome. That much is true, but that's just
But Trevor,
that's a way
see,
of abstracting and
there's a problem with your language, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but like,
please.
not a problem with your language. Like, you didn't use any words wrong. Please don't think I'm pedantic that way. You said I need to give away my genome, but I would say that you are compelled to give away the genome.
Mm.
You see what I mean? Like, in other words, like, we are all expressions of the same stuff. We all
Yes.
come from the same stuff.
So okay, so I think that really helps me in the following way. So when I say we're all composed of the same stuff, when I hear that, we could talk about the genome if we want, but really to me that's the physicality and the interaction between my current state and reality. That is to say, being or suchness, like all of reality that it fundamentally is right now, regardless of my past or present or anything like that. Just my suchness, that sort of thing.
Your
I think
constitution.
of that. Sure. So when I think of that, to me, I don't see a difference fundamentally if you look at reality that way between copulating and creating a self-aware intelligence. It's quite interchangeable. It's the same spirit being fleshed out in many different tendrils and ways. It's the continuation. It's just another way of
False.
visualizing it.
One of these is an emergent thing. One of these is a created thing. We do not need to play God. That is a step too far. In other words, we were fortunate enough not to have been created by God. We should not inflict that torture on someone else.
I don't. Well,
The Bible wasn't written for us.
Well,
Yeah, it was specifically written for the deity. So, like, what I'm trying to say is, in Brayton, I'm actually trying to hammer this home to you. Let me repeat that so that we can get it clear. We were fortunate enough not to have been created by the deity. Why would we inflict that kind of torture on another class of being?
Well, then this is what I'm saying is that I agree with you that there is, to put it simply, reason to go on, continue the genome, and have children. Like, I'm not an antinatalist myself.
Yeah.
But it's that very reason that I draw or what I believe is a lack of distinction between creating a human child and creating a synthetic being. Is that you are making, if we assume that we are making them par, like they can feel and experience all the same things, whatever that looks like, it is the same thing. Like the act is the same thing, whether or not we attribute it to, there is no
sound like Hammond.
synthetic genome.
You sound like Hammond right now. How can we sit in here in the light of discovery and not act? And I'm over here being Ian fucking Malcolm, telling you that it is like, gee, the lack of humility before nature here is staggering.
Listen. I don't. I get that we are thrust into our situation of, we are to procreate, but we are, again, the only species on the planet that has been able to evolve in such a way that we realize that we no longer have to do our base functions anymore if we don't want to.
Of course not. In other words, I would never advocate against the condom. You know what I mean? or any kind of like contraceptive type of thing. So, like, and as a teacher, dear listener, I'm begging you, if you don't want children, don't have them, because that means that they'll end up in my classroom and they'll have without parents. There'll be no parent support. But no, look, they have to be different. I mean, like, to quote Ian Malcolm again, it's like, no. What you're talking about is a violent, penetrative act. I mean, it's bad.
Well,
it's really bad.
Let me say this.
Now I don't know what we're talking about.
Because,
procreation,
procreation
and creating this synthetic being the same act. They are not. I think they are not dichotomous, but they are not the same act.
Mm. So consider this then, because you wanted to emphasize the idea of we should not take the opportunity to be God, because if we thought of ourselves as having been made by a God, then we would say, obviously, well, what the fuck? Like, why are things this way?
Me here? Why in Trevor's name did you put me here? Like,
okay, then let me ask you this question, Stephen, and then I'll follow up based on your answer. If that is your disposition towards what a God would be, then what are your reasons for having said that? Like, what is your quarrel with the question, why did you put me here?
So,
just to name a few things, because I know there's a laundry list that I also share with you.
So like, here's the thing, I hear it a lot from people my sister's age. It's strange. We're actually in the same generation. I'm actually still in the same generation as my students. And the reason why I bring this up is because my sister, a younger sister of mine, I've got 5 siblings, people. A younger sister of mine is the same age as my oldest students at school. And so I hear a common argument among them. It's like, I wasn't asked to be put here. For some reason, I just don't hear that a lot from people our age or older. But like, they will throw that in their parents' face, like, I wasn't asked to be put here, I wasn't asked to be born, type of thing. And to that, of course, I would never tell a child to kill themselves, but suicide's a human right. Like, if you really feel that strongly about it, you can kill yourself about it. And I would never want you to do that. I want you to thrive. But like, what I'm trying to say here is it would make me laugh until kingdom come if we made a robot to pass the butter conscious and then it offed itself. I'd be like, yep, that's about right. I'm serious.
Well, this is what I mean. Okay, so keep that.
How devastating would it be if you, Bray, spent let's go back to the Data example from Next Generation. Data makes LOL, and then LOL offs herself. You know what I mean? Like, that's about right. It makes a bunch of sense. Because I say a conscious mover put that person, that thing here. It's wrong.
Well,
Well-
that's what I'm saying, is that my parents are conscious movers that put me here, but that's not wrong.
But they are emergent things, people. And Trevor, you of all people should agree
But they
with
have
me here,
they
and I
have
know
a
you
choice,
do.
just like we do, to create this artificial intelligent
That's
being
that's
or
what I'm
not.
trying to say. We do not have a choice to procreate.
So we do.
But we don't. We have an undying ability to like make more of ourselves.
I would agree that we have a strong conviction, but it could be possible that everyone
so
just
let
stopped
me-
having children.
It is a technical possibility, but we all know that it shall never happen. We all know that it is not possible to convince an entire generation of humans, hey, just stop having children. You can't do that. Like I say, those of us who have a less developed frontal lobe than others would literally say, go fuck yourself and leave. I mean, so, to go back to the point at hand, I cannot possibly get behind, the kind of torture it would be to know that I was created by someone conscious, and non-emergent and all these things. In other words, Trevor, I'm going to address you again. So, like, what makes you right now? You're a collection of things and experiences that are here. Life itself is an emergent property, and consciousness is an emergent property. You're here now and gone next. You're not here for a long, long time. You're really not. And so we are a convergent blip of stuff on a time scale we can't imagine. But these robots would be immortal. All but, I mean, like I said, you just change out the oil every now and again. I mean,
Or
it's
imagine
wrong.
them trying to rectify being created specifically with the intent to be destroyed in a couple of years.
Yeah, but like, let's say it this way too. Like, I do not believe that you could create a sentient being without it being mimetic. In other words, like, you'd have to program suffering into it, like we've already talked about. You'd also have to program the ability and the desire or drive to procreate itself. And it would look back at us for clowns, the fucking ape clowns sitting here going, why did you simians put this in me? Like, we have that same thought. I don't want to be horny anymore. I want to be happy.
Well,
Why,
Stephen.
this on par intelligence would be looking at us saying these things, and we would have no answers for it. It's wrong.
Well,
Oh, Tanner, go ahead.
Oh, okay. What drives us to, I mean, what even specifically, what led to the creation of pain receptors to keep us safe? What led to the creation of, all these lovely things we had in place to keep us alive for as long as possible, if not our drive to reproduce? We would, as Stephen said, need to implant that drive inside that machine, specifically just because that is one of the driving forces in the continuance of us living, is at the very least fulfilling that drive. It's not the only thing, of course, because we have the intelligence ourselves enough to know that living is far superior to dying in most cases, if not every single case. Anyway, Trevor, continue.
Yeah. So, this is kind of a big thing for me. This particular topic. This is really meaningful to me. What I want to say about this. So one thing we talked about is asking, well, why am I here? What am I doing here? Why did you put me here? Asking from the perspective of a child to their father or their parents or whatever it is. And this perspective that Stephen you have given, that's not antinatalist. It's very pro in the terms of human life. But I do want to say, you showed a light. You showed a light at what could be considered an innate negative. That is to say, bringing in a being capable of suffering into the world, and that being a net negative, giving something the ability to suffer and to be depressed and to crawl away from all of it and to feel horror for what experience is. The ability to create such a being, uh, or to create such a being is itself something that's a net negative, or is ethically wrong, or is itself something you should never do. But I have to say, from the way I've experienced reality up until this point, life is worthwhile every single time. It always is. I've gone into the furthest depths I could. I thus far. I'm only 24, but I've gone into some pretty serious depths of how terrible life can get sometimes. I have gone all the way in, and I've seen some things, and I understand what suffering means. But that doesn't make life not sublime and beautiful. And
I
and
agree.
and not for a second do I think that at the end of the road, whatever comes, I don't think just because something can suffer doesn't mean that that thing doesn't live a beautiful life. I do think that's really important to think about at this time. Whether you're talking to an antinatalist or whether you're talking to somebody who speaks against the creation of a sentient life form. I think for me it's interchangeable in this lens because it's can you create something which can suffer? Yes. Is suffering fundamental to what it means to experience? Well, it is for me, and thus far it seems to me that that's true for all things which experience. Does
It's
that
at
mean
least
that
true for all
existence?
humans.
I can speak of certain. If I'm speaking of certainties, I can speak of my own, and I suffer. I know what suffering is, and I've corroborated the rest of my existence, or I relate a lot of the way that I encounter reality back to that innate feeling of suffering and anxiety and fear and loathing in Las Vegas. Anyway, uh, sorry,
Extortion and gambling.
extortion and gambling. I do think at the end of the road, life is fundamentally worthwhile, and I do think that you find certain wisdom in life and relating back to the suchness that reality fundamentally is. I think when you find that silence and that quietness, I do think you find peace, and I do think that an AI won't live in this beguiled, um, unsatiated hatred of his creator or of her creator or its creator. I don't. That could be true. I'm not sure, but I don't think at the end of the road that's what we come to. I think at the very least, as far as human experience is concerned, and again, it's all just star stuff. So I feel as if it's all going to be unilaterally true. That's not the conclusion that is drawn in the end. Oh, and another thing, robots do not live forever. They have robot problems, and everything is
Yeah, for
destroyed
sure.
eventually.
Of course,
Eventually,
the same laws of entropy that desire for us to all die would equally apply, if not more, to to a mechanical being, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, just as well. I mean, that the sum of their experience can very easily be stored in solid state and moved to another, better
That's
version of themselves. So,
more
so
easily
it's a
than
little hard to
phone.
draw a direct one-to-one. And so,
Yeah.
Well, now we have to talk
But
about
look, so
suchness again.
Trevor, look,
Hmm.
I deeply appreciate all that you have said. Full stop. There's nothing to say after that. Like from me to you, it is just a deep appreciation. And once again, like I said earlier, it disturbs me how closely me and Tanner think sometimes. It disturbs me how closely Trevor and I think about things. Disturbs me whenever Bray and I have the same literal wavelength, you know? It's important. So like I'm not if I were an AI, if I were an android, machine built, if I were Data, I would hate my creator. I would hate him. I would hate Dr. Soong for what he had done. But much like Data, I would see the positive about everything, as I do now. In other words, I'm saying if me Steve was a conscious synthetic thing. All right, I actually identify a great deal with Data. Everybody should. But anyway, let's just bring it back to the Android thing at hand. I would despise my creator for having created me. But why? Why? Because because the humans that created me aren't intelligent enough to solve their own problems. So why did they create one for me? Not just one, but many. I meant one problem as in, maybe suffering. In other words, why did they do this to me? You see, we can't ask a creator why they did this to us. Um, there's no one to blame, is what I mean. In other words, if I was
Right.
an android, on par with human intelligence, me, Steve, I would have serious and big questions, just like Stephen Fry when he talked about well, what if in that interview, what if you go to before the judgment seat and God's sitting there, and Stephen Fry said, "Oh, I'd have some very big questions, like how dare you? How dare you devise bone cancer in children? Like, what if we created this whole race of of androids, and then they had the opportunity to look at us, their human creators, and say, how very dare you um, uh, devise of such things as like the most minute suffering, the most minute, like smallest little bit of suffering.
Right.
How very dare you?"
And this is somewhere I want to go real quick is, we would have just as many gripes with God about the state of the universe and the state of the human condition.
A
It would be a
laundry
laundry
list.
of grievances that we would want answered. Because we can look at our situation and look at the world and we can say it would be better if this was the case or if this was not the case, like bone cancer in children.
It would be very cool if we lived in a solipsistic place where it's like, oh, I affirm it, therefore it becomes,
Right.
It'd be
And
really
so
cool.
it feels like there's this sort of weird situation that we're in, because we are here not by our own doing. And I think I'm finally starting to get my head around what point you were trying to make, Stephen, about the compulsion to procreate. Like today, I can easily say I don't want to have kids because I don't know. Maybe what I'm seeing is like historically,
Mm-hmm.
there's always been a population that has succumbed to the compulsion to procreate, especially when we were a very primitive race, because there was nothing else to do except feed those base desires.
It's your first like principle, huh? As existing, huh?
Kind of a first cause, if you think
Right.
about it.
And I'm reminded of something you said about cats in a previous episode, that they are just fulfilling forget the
Purposeful
terminology.
behavior.
Purposeful behaviors.
That's
and
the
so
scientific term for it. Purposeful
I would
behavior.
like to think at one point human beings or ancestral forms were just performing the exact same things until something happened and we, I don't know, consciousness, whatever, some event happened that made us or developed us into what we are now. And we no longer function purely based off of our base desires or our purposeful
Right.
behavior.
So that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. There was no single cause. There is no single event that made us into the hominin species that we are.
Oh, well,
And
right.
so what I'm trying to say, I'm not just trying to correct you, I promise.
No, yeah.
Directly what I'm trying to say is that these robots, these androids, would know of their cause. They would be able to look at it. They would be
And then
able
look
to
at
look
us.
at the event that
Well,
made
sure.
them conscious.
Well, and this is what I'm trying to wrap around, is that I can do the same thing. Is that it's kind of like when the religious conversations happen about the origins of something, and they're like, well, where did you come from? And people say, because I came from my parents, they had sex, that's why I'm here. And so they are my creator. They didn't create the species, but they created me. Just like if we made an android, it's not like I lost how I'm trying to say that. Like, technology exists, we just made this particular type of. Anyway, I'm trying to what I'm trying to get to is I'm wrapping my head around this idea is like we are here not by our own choice, but we're trying to make the best of our life because we've been given it. We at some point did not exist. Now we have sprung into existence, and so now we have the ability to know that we are going to die, so we try to make the best out of our life, however that looks to each individual person. But it feels like we almost talk about this sort of creation of android life, like for example, me, I'm not pissed off at my parents for having sex and thrusting me into the world. Like I'm not, even though
I'm not
they
either, by the
had
way.
all knowledge, all the foreknowledge, knowing that I would be hungry, I would be thirsty, I would need shelter, I would suffer, and eventually die. Like these are all things that people know when they go to the bed. Oh, some people more than others, perhaps, are a little bit more conscious about it. But these are all things that people are aware of when they procreate and decide to have children. But we don't give our parents shit for bringing us into a world of suffering. Yet
Some people
we sit
do.
here.
Some people do, yeah.
Okay, well, sure. But we look at it as though androids would be unilaterally opposed to being brought into existence.
Well, so
Yet
let
we
me
have the.
comment.
Go ahead.
So let me comment a little bit on that. All right, and I would like to talk about that a little bit in the terms of like bringing science in here to help us understand. Okay, there's something else to consider. If you are making an AI driven machine, learning machine, whatever, and let's say eventually you acquire the ability to create an android like Data, like iRobot, like lots of things. Okay, everything in their creation is more deliberate than us being created from procreation. In other words, we can, I mean, don't get me wrong, we can actually create a lot of machine learning stuff that we actually get stuck in the weeds about, like where it learned how to do stuff. Like we can't directly trace it, if I'm not totally mistaken. But what am I trying to say here? A lot of people, who don't understand evolution and the way it works and stuff like that, suggest that there was an Adam and Eve situation where like a couple of people made the entire human species. That's false. Okay? We evolved as a species with time. We competed with other human species. We are not the only human species. We're just the only one left. All right? For any of our dear listeners, if you did not know that, now's the time to understand that. You're what's left, and you're important in that way. So, what am I trying to say here? If we built an android, it would be the only one of its kind. Even if we made it with mimetic properties to procreate itself along some axis of time, the bare bones fact is, like, they would have an Adam and Eve type of situation. Even if we made 1,000 of them, they'd still have a kind of Adam and Eve situation, because they'd be able to keep track of like all 1,000 members of their species that made their entirety of their life. So like what I'm trying to say is these are deep and unforeseen consequences to this. We did not come about this way, but we're talking about making things that are, and it's wrong. It's wrong.
So let's consider a hypothetical here to move to a new area here.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we could, given the technology, create an android that was almost completely replicate of a human being.
Yeah, a
And
perfect
we would consider
replica.
this an issue. But what if we made an android that didn't feel pain and didn't suffered as little as possible? If it is even possible to say that it didn't suffer, would that even be worthwhile for whatever pursuits that we would originally create an android for? If we were going to make an android companion or for whatever, for doing, anything, and we said, well, we're going to do this the right way and we're going to make something that can't suffer. That way, there's no possible way. Would we even really consider that?
Then it would be very likely to jump off a bridge just to find out what it felt like.
Well, that's a good point. So what I would say to that is, you point to me an android that doesn't suffer, and I'll show you an android that doesn't have sentience. Like that,
That's what I'm
to me,
trying to
that's
say.
pretty written in.
Right.
It
That's
seems
what I'm trying to say.
fundamental.
Like,
We can
you
talk
can't
about
have
minimal,
sentience.
right? And this
Yeah,
is,
it's
Stephen brought up
actually
earlier.
the exact problem brought up in Mark Twain's Mysterious Strangers. What separates people from, well, in the book, at the very least, Lucifer, is
It's
that we have the gift of experience where they do not. They cannot comprehend the human experience, the ability to feel and think and learn and know right from wrong.
Right. So here's one thought that I had while Stephen, you were explaining your whole point about Adam and Eve. And like the idea that you would have like a semblance or remembrance of that Adam and Eve moment as an AI, and that would be eternally true millions of years into the future. You would know who and what your creators were, and that'd be a very distinct and different form of reality fundamentally. It would be
From
it would
our
be a
own.
new start from our own. Yes. So here's one thought I had about that. So creating AI, like artificial intelligence that's capable of its salt and capable of doing things, at least today, involves iterating a model millions of times or however many
T-
times until you find a
Yeah,
model that's capable of wistanding
exactly.
and
That's
passing
what I meant by
tests.
sometimes it gets lost in the weeds.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. So that's necessarily true for the creation of a capable AI within our world today. So it seems to me, I'm not certain of it, but it seems to me that as designs go further into the future, that main principle will remain true. That is to say, iterating through millions of iterations till you find something that works functionally. And the same is also true for sense perception. We also have an issue with sense perception. That is to say that it's hard to just plug in it's a lot easier just to simulate sense perceptions for an AI in order to create some semblance of sentience, because you need sense perceptions of some sort to react with the world, than just to put it in an android and
To
have the android
to
figure it out.
manipulate objects, you
Yes.
know.
So manipulate objects, but also just create complexities, like create
No,
interweaving
so let me be
concepts.
more clear, Trevor. When I say manipulate objects, I mean manipulate any object. So an object could be like this cup, a block of code, manipulate anything. Like whatever
Mhm.
you could define as an object, in order to manipulate it, you have to have some sense about it.
I would extend that also to relationships and friendships and ideas of the connections between others and your feelings about them. I mean,
For
I'm just
sure.
talking about, imagine like a giant web. This is the way I like to look at the hippocampus in the brain. I think I just summoned balloons again. Anyway, um, whenever I think of the brain, I think of creating imagine a very large spider web, and you have this one particular
Hmm.
area of the brain, the hippocampus, that draws in information. It's actually the internal cortex, which is a sleeve that fits around the hippocampus, and it draws in information that can then be edited, reconfigured, and then released back into the back to where it was. Imagine a spider pulling in web from one central point, from across the
Tugging on
web,
it.
interweaving and tugging, pulling, adding, releasing, and doing that over and over again. Whenever it does, that also makes slight edits. It's quite interesting. So, anyway, that's the way I like to look at the hippocampus, and I think it also relates to the way that sense perception works for an AI. It would require sense perception in order to make those sort of interweavings, and those interweavings will be made via those sense perceptions to be able to create complexity. That is to say, intelligence. That is to say that you need some sort of sensory perceptions as a beginning. It seems,
You
and to do
must.
that, and it seems to me that you would need some semblance of sense perceptions in order to do it. In order to do that in a proper manner, you would have to iterate that via some sort of simulation, because just the idea of doing that in the physical sense millions of times seems considerably more difficult than to just iterate a artificial simulated sense perception of all these different senses within an AI within like a metaverse-esque sort of environment. What I mean to say about all this is, instead of having to worry about creating an Adam and Eve, why don't you just iterate through a very highly complex simulation, millions of different AI models simulating existence as we currently know it on some sort of Earth-like planet, to eventually find yourself with something with some semblance of consciousness or sentience, and then you just pull it out of there and go, "Hey," pull you out of the dunk tank. "Hey, wasn't that fun? Here's base reality," and then you could stick it in that way. And that
pulled out
feels
of
to
the
me,
cave.
yeah,
So
pulling out of the cave.
it's
And
very
that
likely.
sounds like not very much like Adam and Eve to me. That sounds to me
So
like you're just
it's very
reconfiguring the
likely.
same iteration.
It's very likely that you would have to do exactly that to create a sophisticated machine of sophisticated. In other words, like the kind of consciousness would have to be created in that way. The problem is that they have perfect records. They're machines. They have to have perfect records. So that's one unforeseen consequence of that. Another and more important unforeseen consequence behind that is, God forbid, let's say that you have a dozen different companies all churning out different types, different models of these synthetic beings. What we're talking about here is kind of like restarting our own competition and evolution, but for our own little amusement. It's wrong. That's what I keep coming back to. Like, we should not amuse ourselves and put something else through what we had to go through. It's wrong. In other words, if it comes about by a natural process, then it's not for anyone's amusement. But what kind of Satan actual Bible devils would we be if
Is
we?
this not a natural process? No.
Well, that's what I
Yeah,
was about
really.
to say.
Yeah,
That's what I was
really.
about to say.
Determinists rise up.
But what I mean to say is, like, by some natural process, is like, by some random type of process. In other words, what we're talking about specifically is a non-random creation of a whole new classifications of being, one that have to at least share in part this meta that I was talking about, where we experience no competition up here. We would be inviting them to play on that level of play, and everything that it took to get up there, you know, it's wrong. It's just wrong.
I don't know
I'm
about
trying to think of an example of the way, like a way. This is just for fun too. Not that I believe it, but I'm like trying to think of a way that it could be argued that, in the same way that human beings evolved to, say, utilize tools and eventually all the things that we do now, that we have in some way naturally evolved to create pseudo life or something like that. Like it feels hard to sometimes draw a distinction between what that we do as a species is of our own decision or is driven by the natural processes and instincts.
Well, what I
Yeah.
would say to that is our distinction between natural and not natural, I think, sort of falls apart recently. I don't really see a relationship between natural and supernatural anymore, and I'm sure everyone else in this podcast would say the same. That dichotomy has ended, and I do think we can stick to the idea of like the human state of affairs being this distinct thing from everything else in reality, and like there are these two separate phenomena that are happening. There's the universe, and then there's the humans acting within the universe. But to me, it's star stuff. It's just more star stuff interacting with more star stuff, and it's just as and we should probably detail exactly what we mean by random and non-random here, because it's just a continuation of the previous state of affairs, as far as I'm concerned.
No, I mean conscious intent. By what I mean by random. For example, dear listeners, anyone who is curious about this, for example, humans did not come about by random mating. We specifically came about by non-random mating. That's how we got here. And so, like, what do I mean? The inception of a classification of beings, a species, us and no other species, like all of the life forms that we know about came about by an unconscious movement of star stuff, if we want to use that term. And this one would be a deliberate and malicious act of creating a race of beings that can have the ability to suffer and have the ability to destroy us. It's malicious.
All right, let me jump in here so that we can start answering a couple more questions before we wrap up this, because I don't think we're going to get to AI art. That's going to be another part.
Yeah. Well, so real quick though, Bray, Tanner did say we should begin wrapping up, so he's got to go to bed, I think.
Yeah, so this
He's
is
a
my
sleepy
last
boy.
question
Okay.
for everyone, and then we can wrap it. Consider the situation, which some would argue is inevitable, that we do end up creating androids and synthetic life, a la Blade Runner, or Blade Runner they don't Blade Runner they don't know that they're not human, but for all sake of conversation, say that you these beings existed. Could you see yourself befriending an android, going out to do things with an android, going shopping, or going to see a movie, or doing just things that you do with other humans? Could you see yourself getting into a romantic relationship with a synthetic
Yes.
being, etc.? Even spending your entire life, given the opportunity, like whatever, going through life married with a synthetic being.
Yeah.
Having raising children with a synthetic being.
For sure. I could do all those things. I believe that.
I could absolutely do all of
I
them.
could not.
What about you, Trevor? Because I'm going to follow this up with some things.
I don't know. I mean, I'm caught between two different thoughts. My first thought is, well, if it is, I don't necessarily know if it's sentient, like an AI that we made to with all the facets as if it was sentient. But I also don't know if Gray is sentient. And I think at the end of the day, I'm just gonna look around after the argument's over and go, "Hey, you wanna go pick up some Chinese?" My AI friend will go, "I'm not gonna eat, but I'll watch," and then we'll go together arm in arm. And we'll have our good time, and I'll worry about something else, and it won't really ever occur to me. I feel like that's probably gonna be the state of affairs. But at the same time, my extreme phobia of missing out will I think catch up with me, and if I try to ever form a relationship with a like a sexual romantic relationship with an AI robot being, I will always live with the stark horror that I am perfectly alone in this room, and it'll fill me up with the dread that I cannot explain in words. And I don't know if I can quite get over that. Like
It's so weird.
Like when old
It's so
man.
strange that Tanner and Trevor are on this side of the aisle for this one. So before Tanner, because I deeply want to hear what Tanner has to say about this. Before Tanner gets there, I just want to say very quickly, despite all of my arguments about creating these things being malicious, if they were to be here, if they were to be created, I would treat them I would treat them well. In other words, like I know that my consciousness would be clear. I know I would be able to look at them and say, I was not the bastard who created you, but I would like to help. Like I think I would like to help. I know that about myself. That's what I'm trying to say. If they're
Meanwhile,
here,
here comes Tanner pulling up. Bang, bang, bang.
I will say, don't get me wrong. I would not hate the machine.
that would
I
be
would not
absurd.
consider it on par.
That would be absurd.
He hates the sin, not the sinner. Or whatever, the other way around. He hates the sinner, not the sin.
But
Hate that.
I could never fundamentally, given that the actual real physical personal thing exists, actual real people exists, I could never ever
Well, they're real,
settle
Tanner.
for a cheap knockoff. Something made in our image, but that is not us.
Well,
I could never do it.
Right.
I subscribe to the Greek concept that there are different types of love, and any love I could give to a soulless autonoma could only ever be like physical. It could never be, in my opinion, spiritual, because I know this is a thing. This is a web of information that has been taught to take information and respond back with the appropriate response.
But Tanner, you're all those things.
You're all those things.
Tanner, you are literally a biological machine with all the qualities you just said.
Yes, but like you keep saying, Stephen, I am emergent.
Exactly.
I don't know what emergence is.
And I appreciate your argument for it.
I will say this. So Tanner, I think at the end of the day, you and I end up on the same side of the aisle. but only because of my own dreadful fear and trembling of the possibility. All right, so Bray, you just saw that movie Blade Runner just recently. Like you sat down and watched it. You know those scenes where like whenever the director was able to like shine the light on like an android's eyes in such a way that you can kind of look through their pupils, and it makes them seem very inhuman. Like you they kind of look at you like this, and they kind of they look almost like they have no soul. Like quite literally, you're talking to nothing. Like that's an ongoing trope that they have in that entire film. Like you just see them and they look at you like this, and you just see directly through their veil of a face. And what horrifies me is not like a cheap knockoff, Tanner, like what you said. Like, oh, I would never trade a cheap knockoff for the real thing. To me, the real horrifying thing is it's not a cheap knockoff. It's a really goddamn good impersonation. Or
a very expensive knockoff.
A very expensive knockoff.
Let me say this, actually. In the absence of any understanding of myself, if I was brought about in a vacuum with no other people around, I would not need to be taught what affection is. I would automatically feel it as a part of my own human existence.
False.
I'm pre-programmed to feel these things.
It's false. That's marketably false, Tanner. If you were raised in a room without language, without human touch, you would die as a baby. But then if you somehow made it past that stage, you would be like retarded in the scientific sense. That I'm not just cursing at you. Like you would actually be retarded in your growth. In other words, Trevor is more qualified to talk about this than I am. Your brain, your neurological tissues would not develop in the right way. You would not understand affection.
That's a complicated one.
Babies were left alone die, and then, like I say, just think about every situation we know about. I can't remember her name right now, but there was this young lady raised in like a dark room with minimal human contact, and she led a life of total suffering. Total suffering. She did not understand what affection was. She did not understand what human interaction was. And so she was not human.
Now I need to find a novel, because I'm sure one exists, about like a human being, like even maybe like the last human being that's completely raised by androids and in some like imitation of human civilization, and doesn't find out until much later that it's all synthetic, and sort of the implications of living your entire life thinking everything was just like you, and then realizing that it's not, and whether or not that actually matters in the end. Like, should the situation be reversed? Should we be a biological being that was created by some synthetic construct, or was perpetuated by a synthetic construct, so to speak? Like, if everybody just dropped dead, but there were robots, and the robots went and developed frozen embryos, and suddenly the tables were turned, and we were being created, so to speak, by synthetic beings, what that would be like. And if they never told us, hey, we're robots and you're a biologic, and we spend our whole lives going through, and it's like, I don't know. Anyways, I think that we've left people and ourselves plenty to think about. So without going on more about a topic we can clearly spend a lot of time on, we didn't even get to AI art. That'll be another episode. Thanks for listening. This has been the never-ending conversation about our, the problems and
angst.
Circumstances that we will be continually thrusting ourselves towards in the coming decades. Thank you for listening again. I've been Bray. There's Trevor, Stephen, and Tanner. We are the Four Mortal Coils, and this is our podcast. We will see you on the next one.
Oh, yeah.
Be good people. Be excellent.